We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cybereason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cybereason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. Subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone or device. You can also join our mailing list, our Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. We do also have an all-new webcast series that we launched this year. It's only name and email address to join. We had an amazing response from our first one. We're doing several more. We're doing contest giveaways that require you to join our Discord server, and it's a great community. You want to check these out live, too, securityweekly.com/webcasts, because the Discord channel was amazing. We were talking about building a home lab, and I tell you, the Discord was just like, people were posting stuff. I was like, wait, I didn't know about that. I didn't know about like so much. We're gonna have someone go back through the Discord logs and append that to the handout. It was awesome. Alrighty, securing Ubiquiti Wi-Fi systems. A couple of reasons for this segment. One, I maintain 3 Ubiquiti Wi-Fi systems. One for the office, one for home, and one for the cigar lounge next door as a favor. And what I found was the guides from Ubiquiti, not all of them are great, Tyler. This one was just kind of very basic. There might have been better guides out there. I was kind of relying on Google to tell me like what are the resources for securing Ubiquiti systems.
Wait, now you said securing Ubiquiti systems, not setting them up. There's a lot of good stuff out there about setting some stuff up.
Oh my God, there's tons.
You want to do it well.
Yeah. You want to put the Unify management software on a Raspberry Pi. You've got probably 257,000 YouTube videos to tell you how to do that, which is funny. You've also got... there's
only 2, you know.
Yeah, it's crazy. Black Hills Information Security put together a great post not that long ago, actually. I think it was like October last year. And basically, I think the crux of the issue that they were kind of picking apart is that your MongoDB runs without authentication for the management software called the Unify controller for your Ubiquiti gear. And that's really bad. Basically, if you get access to this database, you can reset passwords and gain access to the entire Wi-Fi system. Then if there's certain other components that are enabled, you can basically sniff all the traffic on the wireless network. It's like really that simple. So, you know, making sure that your devices you're using to manage these systems, keeping them secure, are really, really super important. Now, I didn't go digging for like MongoDB. Is that listening, Tyler, remotely on these systems, or is that a configuration thing?
No, I believe that is only on localhost.
Okay.
To the service for the Unify controller. And again, your design is, you should probably specify the difference in the way you design it. You've got your Unify controller, or you've got a Unify controller on a stick, which is the cloud key,
yep,
communicates to Ubiquiti and Unify online. Or you've got something like a Dream Machine that has Unify controller integrated into the firewall and the appliance itself. So kind of 3 different setups.
And you can run it inside of a container. The Unify controller that you use to manage your Ubiquiti gear, is that all Ubiquiti gear or just your Wi-Fi stuff?
No, you can use it for other gear.
Yeah,
some of the older switches, some of the older Unify Protect cameras before they went to the Protect system. It was rebranded. So yeah, you can do a few different things there.
Yeah, it's just Linux software that uses Mongo as a backend database. So you've got tutorials where you can install it directly on a Raspberry Pi. You can put it in Docker containers. You can buy the cloud key. So I have 2 environments that I have a cloud key. In one of my environments, I'm just running it on a Raspberry Pi. Then, of course, there was the big Ubiquiti security breach, which we covered on the show, which was pretty catastrophic. So all these things kind of lead up to, like, you got to pay attention to the security of your Ubiquiti system, because Ubiquiti's in that middle ground, which is really nice. Like, it's not quite what you'd get from Cisco or Meraki, but it's light years ahead, I think, of what you could buy from a Linksys or kind of your off-the-shelf gear, which is why a lot of nerds, small businesses, even small enterprises kind of gravitate to the Ubiquiti Wi-Fi gear. And then there's a whole ecosystem. Tyler, I know you've been doing a lot of work implementing their switches, firewalls. They make cameras now. Their point-to-point Wi-Fi, or wireless, I should say, solutions are amazing from what I've been told as well.
Yeah, I think that is, like, they got their start really in the ISP kind of backbone, and that's why their Wi-Fi gear is so great. The point-to-point, like, they had AirFiber back in, man, what was that, 2009, 2010? But their point-to-point
somewhere in there. The gigabit AirFiber, yeah.
Yeah, we shot miles with this gear just right out of the box on consumer bands, and it works just flawlessly. So they've kind of migrated that to where they're getting into that niche for small business or home. But I would honestly, with some of the new security features, intrusion detection features, the integration with the Protect, and the way they've done their Dream Machine with their switches, their gear and their ability to detect a lot of attacks, and their Wi-Fi, air marshalling, as Cisco or Meraki would call it, I would put that up against just about any of them. Aruba maybe not quite as much, but they're including additional Wi-Fi cards in all of their Wi-Fi stuff to do a lot of the more advanced things. And their ability to do mesh and mesh handoffs across multiple devices is almost unparalleled. In fact, that's why a lot of hospitals and stuff utilize this for high fidelity things like monitoring on iPads.
Yep, and a pretty reasonable price too, depending on which models you get.
Yeah, it has went up a little bit over the last period, but it's not horrible as far as like what it's went up to. It is within reason for just to get an access point within less than some of the new Netgear or Nighthawk stuff that's claimed to be gaming. But the throughput on some of these access points just for their regular stuff is well above what you're going to get from any of the consumer grade high end gaming wireless.
I agree.
I just did one like a week ago, no, 2 weeks ago. And I set up a small office client with what did I do? It was a security gateway, Cloud Key 2, Gen 2 Plus, so it can do the security camera, the Protect as well. It was a little switch and a couple of access points, and it was less than $600 all told.
No, that's really good. Yeah, and I've always found the performance of their Wi-Fi gear to be some of the best out there. Now, as I thought about all the steps I went through, because I went through and I updated all 3 environments recently, which admittedly I had lagged behind on, which is important to do, especially today, because the Log4j vulnerability is in the Ubiquiti gear, in the management, I believe, at least. Right, I came up with this like I call it security cheese, because some people call these pillars, some people call them triads, some people add a 4th and they call it a quadrant. I mean, basically it's cheesy, right? But these are like 3 fundamental security pillars or cheese. Also, I think it's funny because we can call it Swiss cheese in my what is meant to be kind of a punny take on security, the cyber attack with the going through the Swiss cheese. This is security cheese, but you can find these 3 basic premises in most security standards, basic security courses, security certifications, right? So at a high level, it's authentication, software updates, and configuration and monitoring. And these are like the basic things that when you apply to Ubiquiti, we'll walk through today, right? So for authentication, you got to change the default passwords. Ubiquiti's done a decent job. They make you change any default passwords, by default. Set difficult to guess passwords, right? That's on you. Use multi-factor authentication and or key-based authentication where available. Again, Ubiquiti is built on Linux and it uses SSH, and you do have the ability to create that key-based authentication. So authentication is very important.
On that, Paul, I had a question around the authentication. I wish Larry was here. Like, this is one that I started to look into and I've not finished yet, but almost all of their new devices, and I believe even their new cloud keys, but definitely their Dream machines, all have the support for Bluetooth low energy setup. So you have to actually have the app within range that then starts up the software here that then makes you change that default password and configure your WAN and LAN and get into the access. So I am curious on the securing that. I have not seen anybody actually recommend that in there, but like disabling Bluetooth setup once your setup is done, and or is that something that gets re-enabled when it's when an update happens or reconfiguration happens? I've not seen it on mine, but I've actually not tried to reset up or set to factory default from Bluetooth. So just a note.
And that ties into their app, their phone app?
Yes, that ties into their phone app, which is also used to stand up standalone. If you're going to use standalone access points to do that, you can actually use your app to get those going and configure on a device only or per device instead of like you do for SSH on that access point rather than using a controller.
I tend to use the app for like quick and dirty. I want to kick someone off my Wi-Fi or block a device or whatever. Or
yeah, their app is pretty robust, honestly. Yeah. And it does force 2FA for every login and session, so that does time out, and you can control that.
Yep. Software updates, super important. Software and firmware up to date in all the systems and devices, right? Because you got your access points in other devices that have firmware. You've got your Unify controller software that needs to be updated, so there's lots of points in which you want to update your software. And then one of my environments has to make a decision to replace legacy hardware that no longer receives updates. Fortunately, I didn't have any of those in my home. I have quite a few access points in my home. They're still receiving updates, but that's, you know, that's part of software updating. Configuration and monitoring. So I like to configure these systems now to alert me when updates are available. I'll show you how to do that. Enable those security controls and secure configurations that maybe aren't turned on by default. Balancing that with functionality, right? We'll talk about layer 2 isolation, which I think is awesome. But if you're in a home environment with a lot of IoT stuff, I could see that being highly problematic. So there are some certain configurations. And I'll walk through a few. I mean, there's a lot more there as well that could easily lead into a second segment when we could do a whole segment on WPA2 versus WPA3. We'll talk a little bit about that.
Is there any way we can automate making sure we're still getting updates for all the stuff, or we got to be just doing an out-of-band research on that?
Yeah.
The interface tells you if the device that you have that you're managing is no longer receiving updates. I happened on one of my environments.
That's awesome.
And it does auto update if you select it with inside of your controller. Your controller can download the firmware and the updates for every device that you are managing, and if you have them adopted as part of your configuration, you can have them auto update when available, or have it auto download to your controller for updating when you tell it to on a schedule.
Yep.
And they're pre-downloaded.
Do you egress manage that? So you actually only allow it to connect to certain servers?
I don't.
Okay.
No. I trust the Ubiquiti firmware system, but it's a great point, Doug. There probably should be some integrity controls in there to make sure the firmware I'm getting is valid. Have you looked into that? I haven't looked into it for Ubiquiti.
The auto update does do certificate pinning and validates the server. However, there's a whole bunch of backup ways to actually get updates on there, and they have things like a custom URL for updates that you just point to a bin that has some interesting characteristics that don't do some of the other things. So you, as a MSP, I believe you can actually build custom bin files for these with configurations in them, and that allows you to pull those from remote sites without some of the security things. But the auto update piece, from what I could tell, just with an hour messing with it one day, it looks like they're covering their bases pretty well in the update process.
Yeah, you can't go on the command line and, like Tyler said, load firmware on the controller and push that out.
Well, that's
to
that kind
devices.
of proxy model where you have like a script that downloads updates, and then you hit that site, like you said, you can hit that local URL. That's a little.
They
more
have offline
complicated.
updating. Yeah, that is a feature. So first thing, you can create a cloud account. This cloud account will allow you to manage your devices in a specific way. Right. This is where it gets confusing. And actually, Adrian Sanabria and I were talking about this. you're going to end up with a lot of passwords, a lot of credentials for all these different things, because you've got your cloud account, so your unify.ui.com account, which I believe is all separate from like your support account. And this unify.ui.com, like your cloud account, allows you, if you configure it, to also log into your local devices, but your local devices also have potentially separate sets of credentials that can be for both the UI and for accessing the SSH services on all of these devices, which could be separate from your access points, which is separate from your management controllers. Like your cloud key, I believe, has separate SSH credentials than you configure for your access points. And those SSH credentials for your access points control adoption, so to be part of that management. Did I get that right, Josh and Tyler?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think so.
If that all sounds confusing, like
it is.
A lot of the hard work is taken out with the new cloud key controllers or with the Dream machines. Like the account kind of is its own thing. Just know that there are nuances. So as you bring in either old devices or you try and reset things, like you've got the option of SSH, which each device has its own SSH, which could be its own credentials. But if you're managing those all in and you've done adoption automatically through the provisioning and adoption software, then that handles those per device keys on the controller. But you also can control that from the controller and reset those raw on that device from within inside the controller. But those all tie back to, you know, single sign-on and a pass-through authentication or UI platform that Unify is using for your cloud key connection to their software dashboard.
Right. So this is the cloud account. So make sure you set a good password there and enable two-factor authentication. As we mentioned, there was a breach previously. Always a good idea to enable that. You need a authentication auth app, a Google Authenticator, right? Will do the trick for that. So that's kind of step one. Step two, again, as we talked about, there's, I believe in this configuration screen, if you were to reveal that password, that is the password for access points that I've adopted, I believe, not actually for the cloud key itself. And again, that's one of the confusing things about Ubiquiti is make sure you've got all of these credentials stored in your password vault. Right? That's my best piece of advice as you're going through this process of installing a new system, updating your existing systems. Always keep track. Where I got myself into trouble is I waited too long to update some of my systems. I forgot what some of the passwords are. Now you're resetting, and I'll show you some ways to get around some of those things. But my best advice is set good passwords for all of these things and store them all in a secure password vault. So I believe, Tyler, right? Josh, that's the screen.
I think that is the application. So that is your controller. Yeah. It's basically your controller baseband system. That's the Linux container running on the controller. Yep. That SSH allows you into that controller in order to do admin tasks. You can do a lot of this from SSH. So that is, so I typically disable that one for the SSH authentication if I'm not managing it through SSH or if I need a backdoor. You can actually re-enable that.
What version of Linux, what distro of Linux are these things running? Do you remember?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
PK exec?
Oh, I didn't try that on the Ubiquiti. If they installed that on it, if you customize your distribution to include PK exec or the poll kit, right? PK exec, I would imagine at the distribution level. I just thought
about it. Sorry, like it totally just sprang out of my head. So sorry.
I think it drops you for SSH though. I don't think it has multiple users unless you're actually in there configuring the multiple users for SSH access. That is a provisioning and root account. So the admin account is
the root account.
If I remember right, is
I think it's all root.
Just a root Debian, like it's a like stripped down Debian or BusyBox. I'm pretty sure it's Debian based. So I would look at the admin account, but you're going to be at root level there. So like the local privilege escalation is not really as big of a deal, right?
Correct. So there are some defaults logging into these devices.
It's very useful.
Very useful to have defaults. In newer iterations, it makes you change the defaults when you stand up the system, but going through the support forums and Googling for it, I found that this set of credentials right here, UBNT, UBNT is username and password, root UBNT, admin UBNT. You'll see these in password dictionaries as well. Another handy thing that I had to use because I forgot my passwords, I wasn't following my own advice to store all of these in a vault, and I was managing very poorly 3 different environments. I had to go on to the actual system and reset the password. And you can do that, and it's interesting if you look at I think it was Cart. Was it Cart from Black Hills Information Security? And this post right here basically talk about the same thing. You're going into the Mongo database directly. You can print with that first command right there. You can print all of the user accounts that exist, and you can reset the password. And the hash that they use for that is not the most secure hash in the world. Again, the BHIS post goes through that in great detail. I believe that hash that's on the screen right there is a password of password. So that's how you would reset.
And this used to be a bigger problem, right, Paul? When the controller used to be a service or an app, it was a Java app that ran on your desktop or whatever you were doing to set these up or manage, right? Like, I have imaged that box, I've wiped that box, I don't even know which box I set this up from, so I'd have controller files all over the place.
Yep.
And you would have these adopted, and you'd have these big configs all designed with multiple access points or passwords or things that you didn't want to have to recreate, multiple VLANs. And so you would go and access one of these or try and find this MongoDB database so that you could get into it so you could get the configs. Now with the cloud keys and the Unify or UI all being online, like, you can reset these, have these go to an adoption state, and have the config that was set for that device or within inside of your site environment redeploy to that within 5 minutes, rather than having to go through a lot of the extra work.
Right, exactly. Still some handy tips, and handy tips if you're on a red team too. If you're trying to, again, you want to get in there.
Standalone APs.
Yep,
they exist.
One of the things I had to do, so I had one of my cloud keys, I forget which one, that I had to reset to factory defaults, go through the exercise again, and when I brought it back online, I restored from backup, and it still wasn't going back to my cloud account where I could manage it from the cloud. So, like, basically this cloud key will link back to your cloud account, and like you'll see a list of all the sites that you manage. And so this one, I think it was my home, wasn't reporting back up to the cloud. And so the way to fix that was, after a factory reset, go in, disable and remove remote access, and then re-enable it, and that reinitiates the process to get it back connected up to the cloud. Which is also, again, whether you're on the red team or the blue team, kind of interesting information to have in your arsenal. And then you can also set it that when you log into a local device, it will accept the SSO from your Ubiquiti cloud account. Like, to make things even more confusing and open up even more security holes, you could enable that.
I'm curious, does that mean that is using single sign-on SAML tokens? That's got to be how that's working for that to go both ways.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they're hooking the login process so that your cloud credentials work as a login to your local devices. It'd be interesting to, could you intercept the,
similar, like Azure AD Connect and how that Azure AD Connect syncs those SAML single sign-on session or hashes back to a Kerberos ticket inside of your domain. So there's got to be a way that that's happening.
Well, do you set a server for login? So like it's like an LDAP Active Directory?
No, it goes back to there.
It goes back to there. I know, but I'm saying, do you set that for something like that so that it has to go back somehow, or does it just automatically do that?
Yeah, like when you enable it, it automatically knows where to go.
So it's in there somewhere.
It's in there somewhere.
Yeah. There must be a config file or something where that's defined.
It is. There's a JSON. You can dump the config in a JSON file, and it's probably just hitting an API endpoint off of that Unify .ui.com with some kind of key that, you know.
Yeah, I always like to go check those, because that was an old school thing where that was where like hard coded credentials and stuff often existed, and you know, as you saw those things expanding in the cloud, you'd see stuff like that where it's in a comp file and they've got some kind of standard thing. I don't know that that's the case here, and it probably isn't, but
but
it's definitely something that's a nice thing to chase down, is how is this thing connecting and what's it connecting to.
Almost certainly a SAML or a single sign-on API.
Yeah, absolutely. I just like to see what that is and where it's connecting and how they've got it set up. So that way, if nothing else, that way I can see in my traffic log the connections, and I'm going, what is that? And I don't have to worry about it.
There is a bug. So one of the things that led me down this path of putting together this guide, it also gives you some handy troubleshooting things too. Certain versions, and I believe it's that current version right there, what I found in some of their support articles, contains a bug where you cannot apply the updates. And I forget the exact details of why, but like basically this is how I started on this journey. Was I went to one of my cloud keys, I logged in, and I said, oh, I've got to update firmware in my cloud key controller. And you can check for update, and it goes, yep, you got an update. And you click apply update, and it goes, yep, I'm applying the update. And then you're right back on the screen where it says update available. And you can do the crazy person thing where you just keep clicking apply update, and it's just not working.
I think there was a verification bug in the firmware. They didn't put the check until a newer version, and so it was a certain version where they were checking that bin, and it just didn't match up.
So security broke things. Imagine that. It happens. So that's when I had to reset my cloud key and kind of went down that path, which again I think is, make sure you're getting notified of updates. Make sure you're saving all of your credentials so you don't have, you know, this is basically technical debt. If you're not going in there and updating these things on a regular basis, it's going to be a lot more work, like I had to go through in the past few days to get everything updated. So after a factory reset, I was able to put random shapes on my slide, which is interesting, but also access the cloud key directly, right? So it's kind of interesting. There's on your cloud key, to make things even more confusing, there's the WiFi controller software that runs on your cloud key, and then there's your cloud key management for your cloud key, which are two separate logins and two separate web applications, essentially, if you're logging in through the web interface to manage your device. So I was able to successfully get the upgrade done, reset to factory defaults, log in through my cloud key manager, not the WiFi controller, my cloud key manager, which is the screen you're seeing here. Then I was able to go in and do those updates and get it updated through that. So you can update it through your WiFi controller interface or your cloud key configuration interface, or you can apply the updates via SSH over the command line.
Which has changed a little bit for the Dream Machine, right? Like you've got the Unify from online, you can do the Unify from a local IP, which gets you directly to the device without going through the Unify UX. But all of those things are integrated right onto the, essentially the cloud management within inside the Dream Machine. So just
and your Dream Machine is also your firewall, your gateway firewall?
It's your firewall, and it has a switch, and it has a port for your hard drive for the NVR for any of the Unify Protect systems.
For the cameras.
Yep.
That's why they
it also does your control and protect, so you've got door switches and audit logs and cameras, as well as the switch software for the switch, and then the firewall, and then your Unify key or a cloud key is essentially integrated into just the firewall itself.
So it's like one-stop shopping for all things Ubiquiti. You throw that on your network and you're off to the races. What's a Dream Machine going for these days?
About $379.
That's not too bad. That's a lot of functionality packed in there.
Cheap.
Yeah. And the Dream Machine Pro, which is rack mountable, is only like $50 more.
Wow.
Yeah, nice. that was the $379. I haven't worked with the non-Pro one. I've only used the Pro one.
Yeah, and the Dream Machine Pro has a PoE switch in it. It has the cloud key built in, right? Doesn't it? Or am I hallucinating?
Yeah. No, yeah, it's got the cloud key built in. It's got the switch. It's got the NVR, the slot for your hard drive for the NVR. It's got redundant power supplies for the Ubiquiti.
Really nice.
UPS, and then it's got direct. So I've got 10 gig direct fiber for both the backup WAN and to connect it up to the Ubiquiti PoE switches.
Wow.
Oh, that's really nice.
And when you say you say $379, you mean $379?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's really cheap.
Yeah, it's really not a bad package for all the stuff you're getting, and then like you can just keep adding on to it, and that manages everything in the controller, so you don't have to worry about it. It's nice.
Wow.
If you don't want to buy a cloud key, although given what we just said of the prices of everything, you probably,
if you can afford the rest of the system, you can probably afford that. Yeah.
But I mean, there are a lot of people that don't want to buy a cloud key that maybe want to have the individual access points. So as I said, you can run these inside of a Docker container. There is a Docker Hub repo called Linux Server that makes available an UniFi controller. That is the best one that I found. You can go create your own Docker containers to run this. This one I actually found was really good, you know, until I got to the line down there that says run this as a privileged container. But again, it's kind of, we established this is like an appliance that isn't applying privileges, right? Like it's root when you log in, it's more of an appliance kind of thing. So I'm not a big fan of the privileged in the Docker container. We'll talk about that in the stories actually. And it basically, you know, volume maps a local config directory into the container, and so your configuration is stored locally. And that's what I like about the Docker container anyhow, is if you are going to run this by mapping your config, you can take and move this Docker container, like you back up your configs, you back up that directory, and then you can spin up this container wherever you want, and it's up and running. You can also really easily update in this one as well. Basically, the way I upgraded my Docker container running the management software, the UniFi controller, is I destroyed the container, I restarted it, it pulled the latest version of the container image, pulled that down, and magically I was upgraded. So that was pretty easy. There's also, like I said, a million tutorials on how to take a Raspberry Pi and turn it into an UniFi controller. I linked to the Ubiquiti community post on how to do this, and there's a huge thread there, so you can read through that. Again, there's also like hundreds of YouTube videos that show you how to do it. I mean, if you have even a basic understanding of Linux, you shouldn't have any trouble spinning up your UniFi controller running directly on a Pi or through a Docker container. So that's how I manage one of my environments.
If you're running out of dedicated hardware, that privilege thing is not as big of an issue either, right? I mean, if you're setting that on just like literally on a Raspberry Pi that nobody can get to, is it a huge issue?
It basically means whatever software is running in the container, treat that as running as root.
Well, yeah, I know, but if nobody, I mean, I guess if you're going to mod it a lot, then it might be a problem. But it seems like if it's just a nice static thing and you built it and it's sitting there and nobody can get to it, then it's probably not a huge issue.
It's not a it's not. I mean, if an attacker gains access to,
well, yeah, then it's a huge
this
issue,
software. Yeah. I mean, it is, but it isn't, because like there's so many ways to manipulate the. Again, the Mongo database doesn't have a password on it,
yeah.
So like, you know, there's that. Like, you basically don't want attackers getting on this system,
right?
And you want to control it that way. You know, controlling privileges on these systems is not something that was put into the design.
Which is why you often end up utilizing a cloud key and enabling some of the advanced features there, right? 'Cause the cloud key itself has the ability, like it does support backups, and you can back up to the cloud, but you can also encrypt those backups. You can secure SSH with your key pairs, and you can keep those key pairs separate. Like there's some additional enhancements, and even doing it this way with the Docker, you know, you may be deploying this across, say, 1,000 remote sites that are considered, you know, hostile sites, or even just remote sites that you just don't have budget for, like a Dream Machine in each one of those, right? It makes sense to have something like a Docker on a Pi where you're just deploying these in and securing the device itself. So there are use cases that this does end up having to make sense.
Yeah, and if you're not doing like regular monitoring or storing the logs, conceivably you could just spin down the container, and when you need to manage it, spin the container up, do what you need to do, update everything, and spin it back down.
That's how I used to do mine. Like my controller just never ran. I had to go. I had a VM that I just moved around with me.
That's a much cleaner. I like
you could
that.
Just totally do it that way. Some of the Wi-Fi. So this is in your Wi-Fi network configuration. There's a lot of different options here. Some of these will speak to security, not all. actually pretty much, I think really just layer 2 isolation is the only security option in this list. And basically this used to be, back in the day, something you would only get from your like Cisco, Meraki, or Aruba, right?
Aruba.
Which basically says, for clients that are connected to the same Wi-Fi network, treat them as completely separate, as if they were plugged into a switch and you had enabled layer 2 isolation in your Ethernet switch. It does the same thing on Wi-Fi, so you can isolate your clients. My cautionary tale that goes along with that is many modern IoT-based systems rely on communication across the network, across the Wi-Fi network, especially for setup. They will oftentimes use multicast and or broadcast when you plug in your Sonos system or your universal remote control and a whole list of hundreds of other types of devices. They kind of rely on that. And there used to be a feature that would enable or disable just broadcast traffic. So like you could communicate over regular IP directly, but if it was a broadcast or multicast, you could turn that off. And that was like off by default, I believe, at some point in time, and wreaking havoc on my network when I was trying to set up new IoT devices. The multicast option that's in there now is allowing clients to send multicast traffic at higher data rates for video streaming, which I'm assuming in some cases could be a performance thing, but not necessarily a security thing. Tyler, Josh, Lee, anyone, any other recommendations or on the screen of things you've
on this screen? No, this is pretty solid in my opinion.
What's UAP? What's the automatic power save thing? I mean, that seems weird.
It is weird. I didn't. Finding the documentation on every single one of these also was not very straightforward. Tyler?
Yeah, the power save thing is for, these are often used in like mobile deployments. So I've seen that at a stand-up like clinic where they may be running on a backup generator or batteries. That allows those to, if they don't have clients on them, as they're handing off clients and there's different zones for these things, it takes it down off to a power save mode. And then when there's clients within the area or when they're bringing up for high traffic, they watch for traffic patterns. Then they hand off that client and it comes back up on the power. So the handoff, if I remember right, this was part of their ability to have the APs save power for individual access points that's not scheduled, because you can actually turn off the power to access points based on the schedule, which is an entirely different setting.
Right. That makes sense. And I was thinking, as much as I want my high performance devices on 5G because they're going to do so much better, I don't know if I'd want to force them there if they didn't want to go there. But
yeah, I'm wondering how that works too. Do they take a device profile and say, oh, like that's a Roku device and it's connecting to me, and I'm going to make sure I always push it towards 5G is kind of how I read that.
The negotiation includes the speeds at which it was willing to talk. When it says I can do 10 megabits, I can do a gigabit, whatever.
So I think some of that high performance is part of the metric for client profiling. They will map out your highest performers or high traffic utilization, high bandwidth utilization clients, and even the times that they do those. And you can actually push those to different networks or have those connect on only 5G, or things like fast roaming clients that move around a lot. You can actually turn that fast roaming on for certain clients or MAC addresses.
Yeah, I'm a fan of not creating a separate SID for 5G and 2.4. I think one SID is just fine, and then let the things like this and get the devices on the right network. It's much less confusing. And
yeah,
less to manage.
I went back and forth on that one, Lee, and I screwed up my home network pretty good by saying I want one SSID for 2.4 and one for 5 gigahertz, and I had all like pre-configured, already configured a whole bunch of devices on my network, and for months I gave up. I'm like, nope. And so what I ended up doing, because it'll automatically create another SSID for you, and then clients will get that. So what I ended up doing is I created 2, and I enabled 2.4 and 5 on both. So I restored compatibility, if you will, across my network, because I'm like, I was troubleshooting a problem. I was trying to isolate the problem, and I was like, wow, that just created more problems than I had before. So I abandoned that. My other question, Tyler, again, the documentation was not very clear. Proxy ARP. It's saying it remaps the ARP table for the station. I wasn't sure exactly what that did, to be honest with you.
So if I remember right, that takes the, because you're going to hand off different access points and different clients, and you can actually lock clients to certain access points.
Yep.
So your ARP table or your CAM table for those clients or for things that they're connected to, I think it just proxies those connections as part of like a virtual CAM table for different devices or different stations that it may be moving to.
Gotcha. It sounds like a performance.
Yeah. There's a ton of cool things that you can do with these, especially for like performance. Beam forming, like it will analyze traffic within your area. If it sees different access points standing up or channels getting congested, it will actually move clients and do the fast roaming moves. So there's a lot that you can turn on, and a lot that they do in the background automatically, which makes them, that's why they perform so well usually on the Wi-Fi side.
WPA2, WPA3. I was not brave enough to pin everything to WPA3 just yet. That requires a little more investigation and research to do that. So actually on some of my networks I hadn't gone in and like revisited some of these features. So you want to make sure, I think at the very least my recommendation is have a WPA2, WPA3 kind of hybrid configuration profile, so that clients that do have WPA3 can basically support the more secure handshake that does not allow for brute forcing of the network key. That's at obviously a very high level.
I can't imagine your IoT devices supporting
WPA3.
Supporting WPA3.
Unless they're awfully new.
Yep.
Hell, 5 gigahertz is a leap for a lot of them.
For some of them, right?
There's plenty of them that don't support 5 gigahertz.
I mean, there's relatively new gear. Like I've got some newer TVs that run Android-based entertainment systems right on the TV, and I was like, I don't want to spend the money in the configuration and put like NVIDIA Shields or anything on those things. So I'll just run what's natively, but natively on the TV it's only 2.4. Yep. And so I'm like, well, it's the cheap TVs in my kids' room. I'm like, whatever. And China probably has a back door into them, and I'm like, all right, whatever. I mean, there's ways to lock that down as well. We'll cover that in other segments. But I think, can we agree that a hybrid mode right now is probably the way to go? WPA2, yes. WPA3.
For now, depending on the devices you have and if you're going greenfield or not.
Sure.
If you got old shit, stick with the hybrid mode.
Yeah.
You got new shit, you might be able to just turn on WPA3.
Yeah. Again, the notification feature that I really like is basically send me an email when there's firmware updates available. That would be super helpful, and you do that in this screen. So I believe this screen is set to default by default, which does not send you an email for firmware updates. So I flipped this to custom, and then you can go through, and I mean, you can, if you're using some of these other features or want these notifications, you can turn them on. But I think the bare minimum should be send me an email when there's a new firmware update. And or, as Tyler mentioned earlier, set that auto update feature and put it on a schedule. I'm still kind of leery. It's like the old curmudgeon-y. I've been burned by this in the past. I don't want firmware updates going automatic.
I advise against it. Being old and curmudgeonly.
Mm-hmm.
I've had nothing but grief from auto updates.
Yeah.
Just, you don't know when it happened. I mean, if it reboots, if it does all these things, and you just need to be able to plan for that. I mean, yeah. I want to get notified that there's one that I need to do so I can investigate, but I don't like it auto.
I mean, here in the office, I could probably get away with that because, to be quite honest, there's nothing like heavy production, nothing production related that does what, like everything we need to do the show is connected with an Ethernet cable.
Yeah, I just like I say, I mean, when I have, even at my house, it's like I don't know who's doing something important right now, and I don't want something to suddenly reboot.
Well, yeah, people who are working from home or schooling from home. Right, I like my home wireless network is actually more of a production like that I have to protect and keep running is more critical, I should say, than, like I said, the Wi-Fi network here at the office. It's just so like our phones and laptops.
Yeah, I mean that's probably fine,
yeah.
but I don't like the idea that all of a sudden it's going to push an update and it's going to reboot, and I don't know how long that reboot's going to take and what's going to be lost,
or if it's going to come back after a reboot.
Well, yeah, I mean it may crash on the update, and then I'm sitting here going, oh yeah, I got a meeting in 15 minutes, and I thought I'm not going to be on that now.
Well, and also as we evidenced, the bug that could introduce itself, like they had, that it wouldn't validate the update, and therefore it's not going to apply. So I could set auto updates and be like, cool, like I don't have to worry about updating that, and I'm going to forget about it. But in all actuality, it's not really going to update, and it's going to get more out of date and out of date and out of date. As a bonus, doing troubleshooting, I was like, hey, I can't gain access. I can't through the web interface update my firmware, and I don't have my SSH credentials. And I'm like, so what do I got? I'm like, well, I can download the support file from the Unify controller software. I was like, cool. In that support file, usually on Linux-based systems, that support file is like a dump of a whole bunch of commands. In fact, there was a vulnerability in, I think it was a storage system or something, that it executed certain commands, and there was an exploit where you could gain access to that device via the support update. And so I'm like, I want to look through the support file and look at my logs and maybe see what the error is to help in my troubleshooting. I'm like, well, crap, the support is encrypted, but it's not encrypted very well, and someone has a script. It's basically just a few commands in that script. In fact, you can go look at that script and see what it's doing and replicate those commands. You don't really need to run the script. It's just a reference. But you can run that script, and it will decrypt that support file and give you a zip file, which then can give you access to all of your logs, which could be helpful. I did notice once I had updated all 3 of my environments, this script only worked in 1 out of the 3. And I believe it only worked in the one where I was running the Unify controller inside the container. The other ones that I was managing through the cloud, it did not work for the support file, so I don't know if Ubiquiti has changed something. Have you seen that, Tyler? I know you've used this script before. Didn't work in some of my environments. You still there, Tyler? I think you're muted.
What does doesn't work mean?
I got in some kind of weird error. I don't remember what the error was. I didn't put it in the slide. But I got an error that was like it couldn't decrypt the file. Was basically the error I got.
I think they changed the file format and the encryption function when they went to the 6.0 firmware.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that's my guess. This won't work on the 6.x version or later.
I was thinking that's what happened. I didn't know a version. That sure sounded like it.
Yeah. So hopefully those are some helpful tips to help you troubleshoot and update and secure your Ubiquiti devices. These slides with all the links and everything is available on our GitHub page. I created a GitHub repo for technical segments, so you can simply go to github.com/securityweekly. That's github.com/securityweekly. That is where I've been putting all of the supporting files, whether they're presentations or whether they're actual code or code snippets or whatever, all lives on our GitHub page, github.com/securityweekly.
Including all of his hard-coded passwords, SSH keys,
hopefully
and
not.
every other
Right
piece
there.
you need to own the network. Just to be clear.
Not. It's a level of diligence to make sure that you don't leak anything, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like, you know what? Each time I give a technical segment, whenever I was presenting on, I'm just going to go change all my passwords and credentials on everything just to be sure. Yeah.
Oh, my wife Janice, every year we go to a conference, which hasn't been for a while now. She says every year there's one talk that makes her go close her laptop and consider never opening it again.
Yes. Yes.
Well, think about this. Have you ever had a support call where they say, run this tool to gather information about your system and send us the output?
Yeah.
You ever looked at the output?
A lot of stuff in there.
A lot of good stuff in there.
Yeah. Support files are it's a thing. A lot of stuff in there. Awesome. With that, we will take a short break. Come back with the security news. Stay tuned.